When you picture a 20th century dictator, you probably see the same template. A coup or a civil war to take power, a wave of purges to keep it, a cult of personality, a Swiss bank account, a palace with a gold-plated everything, and an escape plan for the day it all falls apart. Hitler gets lumped into that group automatically because he's the dictator. But here's the strange part. Across almost every single axis historians actually use to measure dictatorships, Hitler didn't just break that template, he was the opposite of it. He was handed power legally, he never purged his inner circle, he named no successor, he built no dynasty, he refused exile, he ordered the destruction of his own country, and he shot himself in a basement at 56. Every other dictator on that list wanted to survive. Hitler wanted the opposite. And that single inversion is the master key to almost everything people get wrong about the Third Reich. Every other name on that list clawed their way in, every single one of them. Stalin spent decades maneuvering inside the Bolshevik Party, outflanking rivals one funeral at a time. Mao fought a civil war across an entire continent. Mussolini marched on Rome at the head of a black-shirt army. Franco launched a military coup that bled Spain white for 3 years. Castro spent 2 years in the Sierra Maestra running a guerrilla insurgency. Kim Il-sung was physically installed in Pyongyang by the advancing Red Army. They all paid the price the job normally costs: violence, exile, prison, or all three. Hitler paid none of it. On the 30th of January 1933, the Weimar Republic's own president, Paul von Hindenburg, appointed him Chancellor after a backroom deal brokered by the former Chancellor Franz von Papen. No coup, no civil war, no march on anything. As the historian Ian Kershaw put it, Hitler was levered into power by the conservative elites who believed they could keep him on a leash. They were wrong, but the mechanism was entirely constitutional. And the situation only got worse from there. The Reichstag didn't just fail to stop him in the weeks that followed. It handed him the enabling act by a vote of 441 to 94, voluntarily dissolving its own authority to make laws. The German parliament signed away German democracy, legally, on paper, and with a supermajority vote. Within 53 days of his appointment, Hitler had been given dictatorial authority by the very institution that was supposed to contain him. No other 20th century dictator was simply given the keys by the body meant to stop him. Once he was in, surely he did what every dictator does. He killed his way to absolute power. That's the intuition, and it's also wrong. Hitler's inner circle in 1933 was, in most of its key names, still his inner circle in 1945. Hermann Goering had been at his side since 1922. Joseph Goebbels joined in 1926, Heinrich Himmler in 1923. Bormann, Speer, Ribbentrop, Rosenberg, the same faces, the same names, the same men, 12 years later. 2 exceptions prove the rule. Ernst Röhm, the SA chief, was executed in the Night of the Long Knives in 1934. A one-off strike against a rival paramilitary faction that left somewhere between 85 and 200 dead. And Rudolf Hess, the deputy Führer, flew himself to Scotland in 1941 on a solo peace mission that nobody had authorised. An exit, not a purge. Now compare that to Stalin. The Great Terror of 1937 and 1938 executed roughly 750,000 people in just 2 years. It wiped out nearly every original Bolshevik, the men who had made the revolution alongside Lenin, dragged into courtrooms, forced to confess to fantastical crimes, and shot in the back of the head in Lubyanka basements. It hit the Red Army so hard, on the eve of the most destructive war in human history, that 3 of 5 marshals, 13 of 15 army commanders, and 8 of 9 admirals were eliminated. Stalin gutted his own military because he was more afraid of his generals than of Hitler. Hitler himself never did anything of the sort. He trusted his team, or more accurately, he never needed to see his team as a threat because the team was never the point. And the reason that's true, rather than some sign of loyalty or softness, only gets stranger the deeper you look. If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of the Third Reich's strangest paradoxes, hit subscribe. The darkest beats are still ahead. Here's where the stability broke, and where the weirdness becomes impossible to miss, from 1938 onward, and especially after December 1941, when he sacked Field Marshal von Brauchitsch and personally took command of the army. Hitler ran the war himself. He ran it down to the level of individual divisions, down to where the pins went on the map in the wolf's lair. No other leader in the Second World War did this. Stalin, for all his paranoia, delegated to Zhukov and Vasilevsky. Churchill leaned on Allenbrook, Roosevelt on Marshall. Hitler trusted Hitler, and the men who actually knew how to fight a continental war watched in growing horror as he made decisions that should, by every rule of the profession, have been impossible. General Hasso von Manteuffel later put it bluntly. In his assessment, Hitler could track what a single division did on the battlefield, but the bigger picture, how whole armies actually functioned together, was beyond him. The historian Geoffrey Megargy pushed the point even further. In Megargy's reading, what the corporal had done was win a war against his own general staff at the cost of strategy itself, a victory for tactics and ideology over the professional military judgment that might have saved the country. And Stalingrad is what that sentence looks like on the ground. In late 1942, the German Sixth Army was encircled on the Volga, surrounded by Soviet forces closing in from 2 directions. Every senior officer on the Eastern Front understood what had to happen next. Break out, save the men, preserve the army for the next fight. Hitler refused to allow any of it. He ordered Friedrich Paulus to hold the position. He promised an airlift that could never physically have delivered enough supplies. On the 2nd of February 1943, 91,000 starving, frostbitten men surrendered to the Red Army. Fewer than 6,000 of them ever came home. A dictator who won't let his best generals save his best army is behaving against his own interest, which should be impossible unless the interest isn't what everyone assumed it was. Had this is the hinge, the whole story turns on. Name the one thing every other dictator on earth has ever shared: the instinct for regime self-preservation. Stalin killed to stay alive. Mao purged to stay in power. The Kim dynasty exists because 3 generations have prioritized their own survival above every other consideration on earth. Hitler didn't do any of that. The historians who have spent their careers staring into the Third Reich, Ian Kershaw, Saul Friedlander, Timothy Snyder, converge on the same conclusion from different angles. The regime was not built around keeping Hitler alive, and it was not built around keeping the Nazi Party in power. It was built around an apocalyptic racial mission. Everything else was downstream of that single fact, and the proof is the part of this story that is hardest to absorb. In 1944, with the Wehrmacht collapsing on both fronts, starved for fuel, starved for ammunition, starved for the rail capacity to move soldiers and supplies to the men who were still fighting and dying at the front, Hitler diverted trains to Auschwitz. The rail cars that could have carried reinforcements to the east were instead packed with Hungarian Jews and sent west toward the gas chambers. The killing came first, The war came second. The war was a means to the killing, not the other way around. No rational regime behaves that way, because no regime optimized for survival ever would. Every single behaviour we've covered so far, the legal handover, the stable inner circle, the refusal to delegate the military to men who could actually win, becomes coherent only in the light of that one inversion. The mission always outranked regime survival, and everything that comes next is what happens when a dictator means that all the way to the end. A dictator who doesn't plan for life after himself has, in some deep sense, decided there shouldn't be a life after him. Hitler had no children, no grandchildren, no ruling family waiting in the wings, no nephews being groomed, no heir being prepared behind the scenes. He named a successor only on the 29th of April 1945, in the last will he dictated hours before his death. Göring first, then grudgingly Karl Dönitz after Göring's attempt to take over earlier that month, almost as an afterthought to a decision he had clearly never wanted to make. Compare that to the regimes built to last. The Kim family is now on its fourth generation in power in North Korea. The Assads ran Syria for more than 50 years between father and son. The Duvalier ruled Haiti for nearly 3 decades. The Somozas held Nicaragua for over 40 years. The Castro brothers ran Cuba for more than 60. Even Stalin, who killed anyone who might credibly succeed him, left behind a system that outlasted him by 38 years before the USSR finally dissolved in 1991. Hitler's state dissolved in 8 days. Dönitz's caretaker government surrendered to the Allies on the 8th of May 1945, just over a week after the shot in the bunker. Nothing was built to outlive him because, on some level that historians are still trying to articulate, the thing was never supposed to outlive him. And that decision had one final, terrifying expression. Every other dictator who lost ran. Mussolini fled towards Switzerland and was caught by partisans on the way, shot, and hung upside down from a petrol station roof in Milan. Ceausescu left Bucharest by helicopter in 1989 as the crowd stormed the palace. Saddam was dragged out of a spider hole outside Tikrit. Gaddafi was pulled out of a drainage pipe in Sirte. Mobutu, Marcos, Baby Doc Duvalier, all of them escaped into foreign exile and lived out their days on someone else's beach. Hitler, alone among them, stayed in Berlin. More than stayed. On the 19th of March 1945, on Albert Speer's 40th birthday, he issued what history now calls the Nero Decree. The order was straightforward and apocalyptic in its scale. Every piece of German infrastructure, bridges, factories, power stations, railways, food stores, water supplies, was to be destroyed before the Allies could make use of it. He told Speer directly that if the war was lost, the nation also deserved to perish, because it had proven to be the weaker one. The German people, in other words, were to be punished for failing him. And then came the cluster that has no parallel in modern history. Christian Goeschel, in his study of suicide in Nazi Germany, documented a wave that defies comparison, a mass self-destruction among the regime's own officers and officials that, in his description, has no match anywhere in the modern record. 8 of the 41 regional Gauleiter killed themselves in 1945, along with 53 of 554 Wehrmacht army generals, 14 of 98 Luftwaffe generals, and 11 of 53 Kriegsmarine admirals. More than 7,000 reported suicides were recorded in Berlin alone over the course of that year. Hitler's Walter PPK and the cyanide capsule on the 30th of April were not the exception to that wave. They were the apex of it. There's one more inversion, and it goes in the direction nobody expects. The image most people carry of Hitler, the disciplined ascetic, the vegetarian teetotaler, the monk king who denied himself every earthly pleasure for the sake of Germany, was substantially a construction. As the biographer Robert Payne framed it, the ascetic image was effectively a Goebbels invention, designed to dramatize the Führer's total commitment to the cause. In private, the picture was considerably less pure. Hitler ate liver dumplings and drank diluted wine, and he kept a long-term partner in Eva Braun at the mountain retreat at the Berghof. The public brand and the private reality didn't line up. And, on the financial side, they didn't line up at all. The historian Chris Wetton, in his book Hitler's Fortune, reconstructed the dictator's net worth on the 24th of April 1945 at somewhere between 1.35 and 43.5 billion euros in 2003 prices. Wetton argues that at the moment of his suicide, Hitler was probably the single richest individual in Europe. The revenue streams were unlovely but enormous. Royalties from Mein Kampf, which every newly married German couple was effectively required to receive as a gift from the state, flowed in by the millions. Royalties on the use of his own image on German postage stamps had gone directly to him personally from 1934 onward. An industrialist slush fund called the Adolf Hitler Spender, paid annually by the country's biggest firms, delivered more on top. And according to British intelligence files that surfaced in 2004 and were reported by the Dutch newspaper De Volkskrant, at least one secret account existed with the forerunner of the Dutch Postbank. The man who sold the German people self-denial was, in private, quietly hoarding one of the largest personal fortunes on the continent. The only thing in the public image that was ever actually real was the ideological commitment. And that was the one thing that ended up killing his own country. Now put the whole thing together. He was handed power rather than taking it. He trusted the same inner circle for 12 years. He ran the war himself and lost it. He built no dynasty and burned his own country on the way out. He shot himself in a basement surrounded by cyanide-poisoned staff. And the brand that made all of it possible was a lie. None of that is flattering, and none of it is admirable. It's what happens when a regime is optimized for a mission instead of for survival. Normal dictators are selfish, which is, in its grim way, the very thing that keeps their countries intact after they die. Hitler's regime was built to die with him, and it took somewhere between 60 and 85 million people down with it. That's the real answer to the question at the top of this video. He's the opposite of every other dictator because every other dictator, on some level, wanted to live. If the thing that makes Hitler unique as a dictator is also what made him uniquely catastrophic, does that mean every other dictator was, in his own horrible way, the safer kind? Leave your answer in the comments. Thanks for watching History Hangover. If you found this video insightful, check out our other deep dives into the hidden history of the Third Reich. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next upload.